This is Stepper Rhodes, and you're listening to the Instant Speed Podcast.
Podcast is proudly sponsored by Kayfabe Cards. Kayfabe Cards is located in Riverton, Utah, and is your total hookup for Flesh and Blood singles and sealed product. Go to kayfabecards.com and find all of your TCG passions covered, from Magic, One Piece, Pokemon, and plenty more. Kayfabe Cards is also bringing you the Battle Hardened in Salt Lake City, as well as Pokemon Regionals in the coming year. Kayfabe is life. Be who you want to be. The Instant Speed Podcast welcomes back my favorite person. That actually needs an addendum. There's a modification to that now. The original intro, Josh Scott, was that you were my favorite person at LSS. Forget Brian Gottlieb. Forget James White. However, you did make me wake up at 5 a.m. So you've maybe fallen off, but you're still by a slight margin my favorite person. But you're returned to the brand new revamped Instant Speed Podcast. Welcome, rules and policy deity, Joshua Scott. Welcome back, friend.
Thank you very much for having me, and I do apologize about the early start. It's the ongoing issue with cross time zones. It is currently 9:45 here, so late night, early morning balances out, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it all just becomes the fact that you might make it. If this becomes a really good conversation, we might make it to tomorrow. And then you said you would tell me the future, right? That's.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's the important part. But
benefit of being in New Zealand.
Exactly. The robots have taken over. Oh my God! It's like, I have 8 hours to prepare. I feel good. Welcome back. There's been a lot of sort of moving and shaking going on regarding rules, policy, all that stuff. I thought it'd be a great time to bring you back on and discuss some of what has happened. You gave me this laundry list of great things that has been occurring at LSS regarding rules and policy manager. But let's just sort of refresh people's memory. Besides being a grade A storyteller, what are your duties at LSS?
So I'm the rules and policy manager at LSS. So I deal with all things rules and policy, and that involves basically updating the comprehensive rules to accompany new cards, updating the tournament rules and policy and the penalties and procedure guidelines for our tournaments. I write and release the release notes. I publish the errata. I write articles, I help run the judge program, I do proofing, I do lots of things. Anything that touches rules and policy, I usually have a bit of a hand in. I can't say it's all my work, though. We do have an amazing crew here at LSS that helps out on certain aspects of it, and we have an amazing community as well. But from the LSS side of things, that's my go-to.
Well, that's good to have somebody on the case at all times, as it were. So that said, there were some rules and policy changes regarding Flesh and Blood, and it's a constant evolution. And I one of my favorite stories to tell people about this game, or you specifically, is how you got hired, which was you basically kind of had questions regarding the rules and policies, wrote up your own rules and policies, and said, "Here, this is better." Is that a good TLDR about how you got hired?
I guess that could be the cliff notes. But you are point. I was really enthusiastic about the rules. Somehow I managed to corner James White and Jason Chung, one of the lead developers at LSS, into a corner and ask them a whole bunch of questions. And then at the end of it, James asked me if I wanted a job, and the rest was history. And now I'm doing what I love, which is rules and policy.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing it. No, I don't think many people are just out there sort of saying like, you know what? Yeah, 50-page rule books. That's what I want to do with my life. Like that is definitely my calling. And look, it's necessary. Okay, Josh. Like we're glad that it's you and not, it's not me. But you do a great job. And one of the great things about LSS is, for all things not world championship location related, you guys do a good job communicating. I know that's going to be a cheap shot, I understand, but you guys do a great job about communicating intent and motive and things along that nature regarding be it bans and restrictions, and that is something that everybody is very appreciative of, is where you guys are coming from when it comes to these kinds of things. And the fact that you're the one who's writing this kind of stuff makes sense because you're such a great communicator, be it when you're judging and doing more of the nitty gritty, or when we're just chilling, having dinner, you tell a great story. But when it comes to rules and policy specifically, what are the most recent rule and policy changes for those not in the know?
So we had 2 Back Alley Oracle articles that written, and typically what I do is for the Back Alley Oracle articles, I publish like major rule changes or things that are a little bit more intricate or delicate to discuss, something that's not just like the new set release notes or whatever. So we just had 2 published. One of them was regarding the rules changes surrounding defending. And we also had another article on missed triggers, which is more sort of like policy base. So the defending rules changes was essentially just a way to unify how defending cards work. The idea was that we wanted to simplify the idea of when a card gets added to the chain link as a defending card, however it gets added, whether or not you defend with it during the defense step, you play a defense reaction, or it gets sort of like fetched onto the chain link from like Pulse Wave Harpoon or Amulet of Haven Call, that is considered defending with that card. And we sort of went back and forth about the pros and cons of unifying it, because that also obviously involved changing a few interactions. But we decided that it was worthwhile going ahead just for the comprehension, the consistency, and also being able to adapt some of our existing effects as well, like Dominate. So the idea is that things like Dominate now are simply just a static effect that says this cannot be defended by more than 1 card from hand. So if there's already a card defending from hand on the chain link, you can't add another card to that chain link regardless. So Amulet of Haven Call got a little bit of a nerf in that particular regard. Things like Pulse Wave Harpoon are a little bit more consistent. So you can pull a card from hand down, and then all of a sudden they can't defend with another card with Dominate if the attack has Dominate. And then with defense reactions, we basically had defense reactions fizzle if there's something that is already defending on the chain link. So there are some intricacies there, and but in the grand scheme of things, we think that the consistency is the most important thing. The comprehension is the most important thing, and we hope that it improves the player experience. Rather than trying to create a whole bunch of like minutia in terms of like, you have to look at very specific wording as to whether or not this will be allowed to be through from Dominate or something like that. And those sorts of things just don't, people don't pick up on very well, and they don't translate well either. So
the term fizzle, I think that this is something that a lot of people might not be fully aware of. Again, if you've ever interacted with a stack, specifically with Magic, Magic is obviously the first and foremost when it comes to, resolving a stack properly. Fizzling is something that people might not be aware of, especially in Flesh and Blood, where usually everything resolves, whether it might not have a target ultimately or become legal, and that's where fizzling is the term that has now sort of come up. Can you give an example? The example given, I think, was with Thump, right? And
yeah,
go for it.
You're right. Like fizzle isn't a technical term, but it's so widespread. It's kind of like earwormy. Like it's infected my brain whenever I think about the stack now as well. But the primary example was like you come in with Thump, They defend with a card from hand or maybe a couple cards from hand, whatever. And then they're like, oh, cool, I'm going to go ahead and play this defense reaction to cover up the rest. So the defense reaction is layer 1 on the stack. So both players have the chance to respond to that before that resolves and becomes a defending card, because it defends when it resolves. It doesn't defend when you play it. So the opponent will be like, oh, cool, I'm going to go ahead and pummel my thump now. And that becomes layer 2. The opponent doesn't have a response, so layer 2 resolves first. So the thump has now become pummeled. It's got an increased power, and all of a sudden it has dominate. And because it has dominate, and because there's already a defending card from hand, the defense reaction, when it tries to resolve, first it checks, oh, can I become a defending card if I was played from hand? And the answer is no. The thump has already been defended by a card from hand, so this defense reaction can't become a defending card. So it fizzles. It basically gets removed from the stack, goes to your graveyard. It doesn't resolve. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And I think, we had a discussion about the consequences of these sorts of changes. And when the thump interaction came up, I brought it up as an example. James jumped at it and was like, this is actually pretty cool, like counterplay. Being able to give your attacks these sort of evasion-like abilities between, like, your opponent playing a defense reaction in order to stop them from being able to put that on is a cool, like, little area that might be explored in the future. And so as it exists with Thump at the moment, which is pretty cool, but there's always ways to play around it, to really like dive into that minutia or that sort of cool little interaction. But yeah, that's sort of the direction that we've decided to head for the time being.
Well, I guess that would be, a very specific example that very, very, I guess, well encapsulates what you want the rule to sort of do. And like you said, I want to get to this afterwards a little later when you talked about, this is a cool little interaction. And I think it is too. And I have had to explain this new rule or this new sort of clarity to certain people to explain why it's important. Like you said, the stack within even the reaction phase, like how that resolves, is quite fascinating too, where it's like, just because you played a defense reaction doesn't mean it's hit the board and doesn't mean it has an effect just yet, which is awesome. But in terms of current gameplay, have you witnessed certain games, or do you think that there are certain decks or strategies out there that this has a significant impact on right now? Like you mentioned the thump interaction, but since Tales of Aria Limited, I don't think I've ever seen that card in play. And maybe that changes down the line because of these types of interactions. But currently, where does this have certain, like, everyday, right now meta implications?
So that was definitely one of the considerations. So I typically don't deal with the meta and with balance, because they're not rules and policy.
No wonder you're so happy all the time. You don't have to deal with the meta.
I know, right? I just get to deal with all the fun little rules interactions.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Are you saying like Thump isn't played very much in the meta? It should be. It's a fun card. It's a fun, cool little rules interaction.
Winning isn't fun, Josh Scott. That's not what we're here for. Okay, we're here for those gold foil cards. That's it.
Yep. But to answer your question, like, I don't think that there are any significant changes to the meta as a whole. Like, I'm pretty in contact with like the development team regarding any sort of like rules changes like these, and talk to James a lot about these rules changes, and we are very cognizant of what exactly is going on and how these rule changes will actually affect the meta and people playing the game. And so this is sort of one of those balancing acts where it's like, well, we can make these changes to improve the player experience, especially for new players who are coming into the game and understanding cards, and also for future development where we might want to lean on these things. But for the time being, does that actually reduce the player experience of people playing a lot of these cards now, playing a lot of these interactions now? And so with the defending changes, we don't think that it changed a lot, if anything, in the meta. And that was one of the reasons why we were happy for it to go forward just before DTD as well.
Well, I mean, I will say this. When you talk about like how it affects the player experience and all that such, like, to me, it might not affect it today, but I think that it certainly did give me pause to dis to think about Thump as a card, for example. And I think that right now, like I play a lot of Guardian. Bravo right now is just the most fun I have with Flesh and Blood. I love it, but ultimately, when it comes down to cards like Thump and whatnot, you don't give them a second thought. But right now, you're like, you know what? Maybe this is a card that I should think about because people love to shove D-reacts right up Bravo's ass, and it's like it's not fun when you have an interaction like that. But finding that extra leeway, playing within those unexplored margins to be like, maybe this is how this works. And I think I just want to jump real quick, write down sort of the show notes too, because we've sort of danced around it a little bit here, which is I've always wondered, and I've actually had this discussion with several other people, where sometimes these fun little interactions occur and a rules and policy article comes out or something like this. How many times were these immediately on your radar, or how many times is it something where the player finds something out or discovers some nice little interaction? For example, giving an action point with an instant go again, sort of slide in, let's say with creepers. You play an action that has no go again. In the reaction step, within those sort of priority margins, you activate spellbound creepers, you throw a non-attack action in as an instant, and suddenly that has go again, and you get to continue the combat chain. Discovering those types of fun little interactions was awesome and eye-opening for me, which was like, wow, this is incredible. There's so much layering here, and there's so many options for you to be sneaky and great. And it's like, to be a really good player, you need to understand all these things. But in my mind, I was thinking, I wonder if like Josh and James and Brian were kind of like sitting back at home and seeing somebody do this and be like, wait a second, you can't do that. Wait, you can, because it's within the margins of the rules. Like, how many has it ever happened where there has been I don't want to say a breaking of the rules, but a breaking of the sort of rules in the sense that you may have found an interaction, or somebody has found a way that cards can interact that creates that kind of awesome gameplay, that extra action point that you guys were like, yeah, sure, we intended that all along.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I think that between James, Brian, me, and the dev team, we typically cover off the majority of interactions. And I will say the dev team is very, very thorough in their testing. Like, they have, however they understand a certain card during development, they're very thorough in the ways that they can look to abuse that or look to capitalize on some minutiae of the rules. And there's a lot of back and forth between me and the development team during a set development, because they want to know if they can play certain things within certain windows, or how certain interactions work. And then occasionally, like when I go to do proofing on the set, and basically tidy up a lot of the syntax, there'll be a couple of like minute things that the dev team has thought of but hasn't really carried through in the syntax. So it's my job to like tidy up the syntax and think of some edge cases where that syntax might not be applicable or where it can be abused. I think there's very, very few cases where someone in the community has thought of an interaction that either I or the development team haven't. The one that comes to mind is probably the Frost Hex passing. Is it passing, or is it Miraging Metamorph, or passing Mirage or something?
Oh, there's the one that copies an aura?
Yeah, no, it doesn't copy. You name a card, and that card becomes Illusionist until the end of turn.
Oh, yeah, this is escaping me now, but go on.
Yeah, but anyway, so if you have a Frost Hex and you attack the opponent with this card, you can name Frost Hex, and then all of a sudden, all Frost Hex become Frost Hexes become Illusionist. And then if you have Crown of Reflection, you can activate Crown, destroy that Frost Hex that you control, which is a good thing, getting rid of a Frost Hex, and put an aura into play. And It wasn't something that I think the devs team. It wasn't something that LSS had picked up before. Like we hadn't really thought of that particular interaction. But that's the beauty of Flesh and Blood, right? Like as you say, we've got this non-rotating card pool. We've got so many cool like little effects that come back, and then people sort of jump on these and create new interactions, and then may even be meta-defining in some situations. But that particular interaction was something that wasn't picked up by LSS and works perfectly fine within the rules. And when I did see it in the Discord, I pinged James, and he was like, "Yep, that seems pretty cool. That's good."
Planned it the whole time. This is exactly just
absolutely.
No, this was by design. You just guys take all the credit. Look, there's nothing wrong with that. But I just have constantly thought, I'm like, there's no freaking way that this is what they thought of. But again, that's just me because I'm a donkey and I don't know half the rules.
Well, it's sometimes sometimes I think I've missed something. So like one of the cases was with Levia. So Blasphemous Levia Consumed, where you can play a card with Blood Debt from your Banish Zone once per turn. And then Mansan asked me as well, when he was doing his proofing, he was like, "Oh, can you play what is it? The Guardian of the Shadow Realm, the defense reaction on your opponent's turn from your Banish Zone?" And I was like, "Can you?" I was looking at the rules and just like had to confirm with the dev team, like, this works, right? Like this is how it was intended to work. And the dev team was like, "Yep, no, we tested it and thought it was it's fine." And I was like taken aback because it was something that I missed during proofing, that I didn't even consider that. But again, as I said, right, like LSS is a big team. It's not up to just one person. And between me and the devs and James and Brian, like we've got pretty much every interaction covered that you can think of. It's only those very, very small diamonds that slip through, and then if it's a big problem, then we'll fix it. If it's not, then hey, that's a cool interaction.
Well, this is a fun conversation that we've had with just sort of figuring out things. Like, for example, whenever a new card comes out or a new set comes out, there's always like one or two cards that come out that people just lose their minds about. It's busted, or it's this, or Brian, did you even read the card, and whatever all that other nonsense is. Ultimately, though, we think about it, and it's like, let's say that you have a team of, how big is the testing team, out of curiosity? Like, how many people?
So I don't know what we're up to now, but like it's big enough that everybody can, like, we can test limited essentially like every single day.
Okay, so
even if there are people missing. So it's I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are now, but it's sufficient to be able to thoroughly test a lot of what we need testing for sets.
Is saying that the testing team is 10 people too much or too little, like drastically?
I'm not entirely sure. So fun fact, I actually work out of office most of the days. So I am based here in Christchurch when the testing team is up in Auckland, because most of my work is online and through communication. So I don't go into the office that much. That's probably more of a question for Brian and
Sure.
Seeing how big their testing team is these days.
You say like you have enough to do limited. So let's just say, with a couple extra change. So let's just say it's 10 people testing 40 hours a week. So there's about 400 hours a week worth of testing done for X amount of time. What we were discussing in terms of how when new cards come out that become broken and whatnot, it's like, let's say a new set comes out and that the testing team have worked on for a couple months, so there's that much hours. It's incredible how all it takes is, let's say, one big event, one Pro Tour, let's say, and within that one Pro Tour weekend, you have that many man hours of time that has been spent with the game, that the entire testing process for the entire game, like one weekend worth of play, has equated to that much. And that's just by the sheer volume of people playing it. And obviously, I'm thinking about like Pro Tour Baltimore. We had like 900 plus people in a calling. But it's incredible because it seems like as much work and as many eyes and at time spent, evaluating rules, there's got to be stuff that you people just miss because maybe it's like this one random small interaction that somebody in the middle of nowhere randomly thought up or encountered, and they're like, wow, okay, this is an interesting, intriguing rule. And when that does come up, though, when something like this does occur, walk us through the process of a policy change or a rule change. And I guess that it all begins with how does it sort of become a blip on your radar?
So we have a pretty amazing judge community, and that's who I typically, communicate with to touch base with the community. And if there is something that like crops up, maybe there is a specific interaction that people are concerned about. Usually, it'll go through the filter of the Ask a Judge channel or the rules discussion channel in the Judge Discord. Someone will come in asking about a specific rules interaction. An L1 or an L2 judge will probably take that to one of the judge-only channels to discuss whether or not the answer that they had prepared would be suitable. And then if it's a rules change, so let's say hypothetically that there was some interaction that was a little bit funky. From there, we have a community rules team headed up by Niccolo Piquet. And typically he and his team usually pick up something and then forward it up to me. So if there's a specific rules interaction that is like a bit bonkers, I'll usually hear about it through them if I don't browse Reddit or Discord or whatever at the same time. And then I'll go ahead and see what I can confirm or deny in terms of like how exactly an interaction will work. So that'll usually be me going through my own comprehensive rules or release notes, or looking at the syntax and looking at our proofing notes. And then if we discover that there is something fundamentally wrong, if there's a fundamental issue, then it becomes a discussion internally with the development team and with James. And usually it'll be a discussion on how exactly something was intended to work, especially because it had gone through development and whether or not the development team had picked it up. And then if we find that there was something that was, say, untested or was tested but hadn't been designed to work in a certain way, and there requires a change to the rules, then we look at the scope of what the rules changes, how much it's going to affect the comprehensive rules, how big of an effect it's going to have on the community, how big of an effect it's going to have on like meta play as well. And then we decide on the right time to publish those particular changes, those particular rules changes. Moving forward, we typically want to publish any kind of rules changes with the release of a new set, because the meta shift is quite large already. People haven't dedicated a huge amount of time specifically into a certain interaction or a certain deck when they don't even know what cards have come out in the set or haven't practiced with them. So that's also a little bit further away from these larger events like Worlds or Pro Tour or these huge callings. So typically we would aim for those sorts of windows of opportunity to be able to publish these particular rules changes. And then it's a matter of disseminating that information to the community. And typically I go through my judges, so making sure that the judge community knows the interaction as best they can first, and then coming up onto Instant Speed podcast to explain those rules changes and making sure that the rest of the world knows it, because we all know that everybody listens to ISP. So this is me doing my due diligence and making sure that everybody knows how defending works now.
Well, the better thing you could have done is, rather than write an article, is just be like, you should listen to this episode of ISP where all this will be explained. Like, I feel like, if you're going to do me a solid this way, like, you could actually just go the distance here, Josh, and kind of...
Yeah, we'll link you in next time, huh?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, when it comes down to it, and by the way, Niccolo is like a really awesome dude. I love this guy. See him at many events. He always comes this high if I don't see him first. Just one of the first people in when I was sort of into my foray into content creation, when I was just a young buck within this flesh and blood world, who recognized me at a tournament and came to say hi and such, and that was a really good feeling. Nick's a really cool dude. But when it comes to when a rule is sort of put up for clarification and such, what are the criteria where you're like, this needs a change or this needs a clarification? Like, is there a scale where you're like, this just needs, for example, the whole freezing mechanic. And like this is another thing where like when something is frozen, because I think everybody was losing their collective minds when the new Northern Winds card came out, where it's like freeze a thing, but it didn't specify till the end of turn, and people were like, oh my god, it's like forever, and even like tomorrow I won't be able to use it. Like people were absolutely saying this is insane, but Oldham had already like rotated out. But ultimately, when does something just need kind of like a little revamp, or when does something need a complete overhaul? Like, what's the sort of sliding scale on this?
Honestly, it's such a case by case basis. If there's certain aspects of cards that people don't understand very well, then we might put out a rules reprise article or include it in a rules reprise article to help, like, sort of, adjust that sort of a thing. Like Livia, for example, the constant question is Livia, Blasphemet, Demi-Hero card, is that playable in Blitz? And the answer is yes. But we had so many of those questions come through, and so many questions about the minutiae of Livia. The rules reprise article that I was going to write was going to be about just all the shadow cards, but because Livia was sort of at that top of that list about being the forefront of every single question, and a lot of people not having the correct responses or the correct answers in public discords, on Facebook, on Reddit, on Twitter, we decided that, okay, we're going to shift this rules reprise article to be a Livia focused one, so that people understand the card, and then when they go up to a tournament, they can understand how it works, especially even if they don't play it. So there's that aspect to it, in terms of like, okay, we can be a little bit flexible in terms of what articles we put out, what certain interactions we address, in order to make sure that players understand the interactions. When it comes to things that are a little bit more minute, like I can't even remember what card it is, the one that you're talking about with freezing and Oldham. Is it Endless Winter?
Northern Winds, yeah.
Northern Winds, yeah. So we made a decision that we wanted freeze to be default until the beginning of your next turn, as opposed to explicitly specifying that particular duration in the syntax. And lessons learned. We could have been a little bit more forefront in terms of like explaining that before the card sort of like dropped, or exactly how we disseminated that information. But especially during the preview season, I'm usually pretty vigilant in making sure that the correct answers get through as soon as possible. And as we talked about before, like, one of the key parts of that is disseminating that information through the judge program. So making sure that the judges are aware of how the interaction works and what is going to happen to the comprehensive rules before it gets published. And then they can start to, tell their locals and tell their TO, and they can sort of start to do that job for me, because I can't be awake 24/7 answering every single Discord question or Facebook message like I used to. I've got to rely on some judges to do it for me at some point.
So now this sort of begs the question of, has there ever been a rule change that has sort of birthed out of needing to sort of nerf a card? And I know this, you can nerf a card, but erratas and bans are always sort of last resort. Has there ever been a situation where you've had to approach kind of toning down a card or interaction by amending a rule or sort of adjusting it to a degree?
Nah, never. So, like, I leave all of the balancing up to the development team. They know exactly where they want to be in terms of the meta. Like, they're in charge of the banned and suspended announcements. They're in charge of balancing the cards. I just step completely away from that. But it's my job to make sure that the rules are consistent. There was a case with Open Center, the Ninja card. So when I published the Comprehensive Rules 2.0, we had a case where we needed to make sure that the syntax was cleaned up about whether or not a card that didn't have a property counted as that property being 0. So the pitch value of a card, for example. So not pitch value, the cost. So if you have Heart of Fiendal in your pitch zone, it doesn't have the cost property, so it doesn't have that little like red icon with 0 in it. So does it have a cost of 0? And the answer is a little bit sort of nuanced. But in the case of things like Open the Center, it had been ruled one way where you weren't able to defend with equipment. But due to the rule change with comprehensive rules, now you can defend it with equipment based on how it was worded. And it was a toss-up between an errata for that particular card, which we didn't think was necessary. We thought that it was better to let it take the fall for consistency than to errata that and reduce player experience by reducing their comprehension, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, that's just the trade-off that we make. It wasn't a targeted nerf, as some people like to think. Some people are like, oh, you just ruined Benji because you've removed like one of his best cards. Like, no, that was never the intention. It's never my intention to nerf any particular card. From my role in the company, my priority is to make sure that the rules are consistent and people are having a good time and people understand the rules and the player experience is up.
So just for clarity, do cards that have no cost printed, are those considered zero cost?
No, in most cases. The exception is
here's all the little extra bells and whistles with your answer, huh? Yes, but
there's always a but. Like it's the golden rule, right? Like, you know, there's always an exception to something. Like you look at something like Ravenous Rabble, right? Where it's like, okay, look at the top card of your deck. This gets minus X power, where X is the pitch value of the card. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, you know, deck cards always have a pitch value of 3, 2, or 1. But you look at Gorganian Tome, you look at Demixinal Vortex, all of a sudden you have a no pitch value. It's not a 0. It's no pitch value. So what is X in that particular case? And the answer is 0. So it defaults to 0 if you require a number for a specific effect or a specific calculation. So those are the cases where we have these exceptions and whatnot. But unfortunately, Open Center didn't make the cut. It got nerfed unintentionally from consistency rules change. And I'm sorry to all you Benji players out there.
See? Open Center has died for your lack of foresight. How dare you?
It has died so that the comprehensive rules can become great. That is why.
So the other question here is, when it comes to these kinds of things, you're only one person, and the example I gave earlier of the amount of testing that the team might do in a month can be accomplished in a day at a major calling. Do you ever take feedback from the community? Has the community ever influenced you or maybe put something on your radar to be like, this is something that we need to look at? Or, you know what, like our initial evaluation of this interpretation of the rule was incorrect because of not necessarily an outcry from the community, but like like this is the one thing, is that I'm all for feedback as long as it's constructive. And that's the tough part, because like you mentioned browsing Reddit, and I bless you, sir, because I've been in certain gaming communities where it has honestly been like a minefield of negativity and just, you know, basically the mantra is, this deck beats me, beat this, like nerf this deck kind of thing. Do you ever sort of weed through it and say, wow, this has been there's a very, you know, potent argument to be made about making this rule change or clarifying this rule as such? Has that ever occurred, or what is the community influence on rules and rule changes?
So, like, we have quite a lot of we're influenced quite a lot by the community, and it's, in terms of rules changes, not so much. Usually it's mainly around clarifications. And as I said, right, like if there's some rule that isn't well understood by the community, then we put some focus onto how we can educate the community, how we can get that ruling out there, how we can correct any particular issues or misconceptions. So that's one part that is community driven. The other part is like the policy side of things. And this is more to do with like the tournament rules and policy and the procedure and penalty guideline. And sort of like we look a lot at what players are saying and what the player experience is, and a lot of how the judges are feeling about certain rulings. And I mentioned earlier as well that we had 2 articles of Backley Oracle published, one for Defend, one for Miss Trigger. And the Miss Trigger one was one that had been influencing me for quite some time. I'll give you the cliff notes. Basically, We don't want players to be responsible for their opponent's missed triggers. Like, we don't want to punish you if your opponent misses a trigger. But triggers are actually really important for maintaining the correct game state, and especially the equity or the integrity of the game. So we evaluated how we deal with what happens when a player misses a trigger. And in the previous iteration, it was basically if you missed a trigger, your opponent gets to decide to put it on the stack or not. And if it was good for you, then, or if it was beneficial, you get a warning, i.e., you missed something beneficial for you. If you miss something detrimental to you or bad for you, then you get a warning. So a caution versus a warning. So we adjusted that. So instead of the opponent getting to choose the whether or not the trigger gets put on the stack, now what happens is we apply partial fixes or rewinds, and we otherwise treat it like a game rules violation. There's still no incentive, or there's still no requirement for you to like basically try and catch all of your opponent's triggers. Like we felt like that wasn't pertinent to a positive gameplay experience for players. But at the same time, like, we adjusted the policy so that we can increase the integrity of the game state and hopefully increase the player experience as well. And a lot of that was community driven. Emilion, who's our policy lead, was one of the forefronts on terms of like giving a lot of that feedback back. And moving forward, especially with that policy change, we will be looking towards the community to see what they feel about those particular changes and, what needs to be clarified so that we can adjust what is written in the document. And, there's no perfect science, especially when it comes to policy. Like, I don't think the policy document is perfect. I don't think it will ever be perfect. But the most important thing is that we continue to listen to the community. We continue to have our ears to the ground and making sure that players are playing the best games that they can at these tournaments and having the best experience that they can.
This sounds good. Again, the rule book for this is so complex, and I just came back from the calling in Cincinnati, where between some of my rounds after getting just completely smashed by superior Lexi players, I was hanging out with my buddy Jordan Kennedy, and we were playing Pokemon in between the rounds, like while the rounds were wrapping up. And I was like, what a different game. It's just jam. It's basically jam and energy, draw 80 cards a turn, smash your opponent's Pokemon, move on. Like there's no layering, there's no triggers, there's no reaction, there's no stack. And it's just kind of like, God bless you all there for doing what you do, because dear Lord, just myself, who has to, when I'm broadcasting and doing calling a match, I need to know the majority of what the hell's going on. But there's always some freaking genius out there that wants to do something new and crazy, and I'm glad that there are bigger brains than mine that are out there being like, no, we knew this was coming. But it's just nice to know that at the same time there are things that kind of caught you off guard or said like, oh, well, yeah, that's kind of how we intended it. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like, nobody's perfect. Like, nobody in LSS is perfect. And, there are going to be mistakes made from time to time. But, I think that the most important thing is that, it gets recognized and, we come up with a plan and then start to move forward on it. I don't think that there's anything worse than saying something, making a mistake and then ignoring that mistake and just saying everything's okay. In fact, like when it comes to something like rules and policy related, if something is wrong, I'd be the first person to admit that I missed it or I made a mistake, because as long as people know that I'm trying to work towards fixing it, then they can be they're much more acceptable of any changes we make to it. And if somebody catches something that I miss, I'm really appreciative of it, because if somebody it's like what you said, right? It's 1,000 people testing 1,000 hours versus LSS testing within our own group, and a lot more can be discovered when given that opportunity of those man hours. And I'm appreciative whenever that feedback reaches me, because then I can basically I can scab off those man hours to continue to improve the game.
So the next question is this brand new kind of, what's the term? Reward, as it were, for judges and judging. And I am lucky enough to say that, I mean, Flesh and Blood is my first foray into competitive card gaming in a paper aspect. And most of all of my high level card gaming prior to this was done online. So there was no need for judges because everything was pushed through, the coding that made sure that it came out right on the other side. Where 99% of the interactions I've had with judges have been exceptionally positive. I have I had a couple sort of hiccups here and there, but ultimately it is what it is. They weren't like bad or whatnot, but I've heard nightmare stories from other games, and I've heard stories from this game as well. Just to say, but the judge crew that we have that I interact with on a regular basis, being able to hang out and talk to people like, Teague or Nick or Maddie and all these people they're just such fantastic people who know the game and handle issues really well, and they need to be rewarded. And one of those ways that I guess you guys have developed now are these judge packs. So what are judge packs? How did this sort of idea become real, and what is the mission of judge packs?
So, we took a long, hard look about exactly how we wanted to reward judges as a recognition of their work and their ethos and, the dedication that they put in towards the community. And, the judge rewards that we had were working okay. I would say that people were pleased about some of the rewards. Other rewards sort of were a little hit and miss. But the problem that we sort of identified was things like consistency and expectations, where we wanted to sort of set up this idea where you can look forward to when the rotation happens of a judge reward. And you can clearly see like what exactly you want to be able to achieve. So like, we might have the Wartune. Was it Wartune Herald was one of the judge promos not too long ago. But the issue there, of course, was if you don't play Prism, you're less likely to appreciate that as a promo for you. And that was a big problem for a lot of our judges because often they don't get time to play and they only stick to one or two heroes. So a Wartune Herald is less of a reward to them as it is just another card that they can maybe sell or trade for something. And we wanted to make the judge packs a bit more special of a reward. So we looked at, what other rewards have been done in the past. And it was James who came up with the idea of having a booster specific for judge packs. And that's sort of where we ended up leading. So the judge packs themselves are a one card booster pack, essentially. And that one card is from a set of 6 cards. So it can be randomly picked from one of those 6 cards. And those 6 cards are a mixture of adjudicator cards, which are sort of like UPF only cards, and other cool cards. So like some generics. Judge Pack 1 has the Arclight Sentinel, which is pretty dope. And all of them are in cold foil. So, they've got some sort of special bling to them as well. And, from what we've seen so far, like, people are really, really positive about them because, again, being able to acquire these and sort of have a memento or feel rewarded, recognized for being a part of the Flesh and Blood judge community, that was a really, really big thing towards us creating this particular reward for judges.
So is it easy enough to just say that if you want one, you should get hired as a judge for an event of the magnitude of a Battle Hardened or better? Is it just a guarantee, or is it just not all events have them? How does somebody who wants to put in the effort to acquire these, how do they go about getting one?
Well, a good start is to start looking into becoming a judge. So we only sort of distribute these for people who are part of the judge community, which is a big part of it, right? We don't want to just randomly give these out to players who aren't part of that community because they are specifically rewards for people who have put in the effort to becoming judges. So if you're interested in acquiring these through natural means, then it is a matter of becoming a judge, and you can do that at judge.fabtcg.com. We have Judge Hub there, so you can sign up, make an account, you can certify yourself, and then you can start getting involved in the community in Discord, on the Facebook channel. And from there, it's a matter of talking to your local game stores, your local TOs, like saying, "Hey, look, I want to be part of like the judging team for your ProQuest or your Road to Nationals," or "Hey, can I judge the skirmishes practice?" Or and then like from there, you can start to look at, okay, there's a battle hardened, a town over, a city over, or there's a calling. Like maybe I can be part of that and do side events, or maybe be on the prize wall, or so it's small steps that you take towards these larger goals. But the first step is to become a judge, to sort of start digging into that minutiae of the rules and policy, and then from there it's it's all up.
Like you prefaced it as a natural way, like
I mean, I know people can acquire these judge by buying them off other judges.
Yeah,
but
that is like I've seen it. Those are some unholy prices that I've seen. Like it's also
for now,
sure. I just want to address like this trend right now, which I've seen here and there, which I have openly mocked. Which is when somebody opens a particular card and they will as slap on a fat premium to it when they're selling it because they declare it as a world first opened, and it's like, you bozos. I'm like, do you know how many of these are opened elsewhere that you just don't know about? Like, because you put it on Facebook first, like you're going to put a 200% like markup on it. Like, get bent. Like, what is wrong with you?
It's like a serialized 1 of 10,000 card. Like,
yeah, exactly. It's like world first. Is it? Are you sure? Like, no, that's not the way to go. But they do come, like these cards do come with fat price tags on them because, like you said, they're either cards that you could only acquire within this very limited, release, or they are very playable, impactful cards that people want in the most either blinged out, shiniest way or the rarest form of. And I gotta say, because Red Pummel is one of those cards, and I know that my close friend Charmer is so just licking his chops that he doesn't want just one, he wants a playset, and he is a Pummel guy. He loves the card, and when this came out, he just it was that sort of Futurama meme of when Zap Brannigan
take my money.
Well, there was that one to begin with, but it's like when it's the death by snoo snoo thing where they're all like like their whole that expression keeps changing. That was what I witnessed. It was because he just kept realizing that he could play cold foil pummels, and then realizing that they're probably like $500 to $600 a piece, and so this goes to my next question here, which is how much of this is sort of built-in compensation that might otherwise replace something like straight up cash? And because I speak to judges and they work hard. They do an incredible job. They're there early, they leave late. They are constantly dealing with sorting out people's problems and whatnot. But oftentimes sometimes judging is like it's not a matter of, yes, this will always be profitable. Sometimes they have to factor in travel and accommodations, which might be not included, which a lot of people don't realize. It's like, hey, you want to judge this event? Here's the pay, but you got to get there, you got to stay there, you got to eat there, and everything else. Is this meant as a supplement to compensation? And I'm not saying that from the regard of like, oh, well, we're looking to shortchange them, and this is sort of going to cover that gap. But at a certain time or a certain degree, I would imagine that you guys are offering these with the realization that there is significant financial value to these. Like there's significant monetary value to what you're giving out that, you got to assume that this is just part of the package, right?
I mean, it's a I would say that this is a very, very delicate conversation to have.
100% it's
Yeah,
delicate. I
the
completely agree. And I just also want to preface this is that this isn't to say that the judges are getting paid like $5 an hour or whatnot. They're getting compensated, absolutely. Otherwise, nobody would show up, right? That like they are getting the proper compensation, but at a certain degree, I mean, I have done gigs where they're like, well, we can't offer you much, but we can supplement it with, like we'll give you an extra, like you can take $200 store credit off the shelves or whatever, to sort of supplement it. Cash is always king, obviously, but I can see sometimes where this is just extra incentive where whether, it's like, hey, not that you're rolling the dice on what you might make, but maybe you open a card that you're not too keen on and you could flip it for an extra few $100 and like there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that this is not meant to be compensation. It's like 100%. Like, if the judge rewards are removed, then judges should still be getting paid 100% fairly for the work that they do at an event. As any kind of role, right? Like, you turn up to an event, you should be paid or you should be compensated by the TO or the organizer, or the event manager, whatever, fairly for your work. And whether that comes in a combination of product or cash or whatnot, like that is what your compensation to be to be. What the judge reward is it's LSS giving something over top of that as a recognition of the judge's dedication, beyond that sort of expertise. Because you get compensated for your time. You may get compensated for your travel going to an event. Like, we have certain travel stipends for certain judges at larger events. But the judge reward is sort of to recognize that, hey, before this event, you went ahead and you studied for this exam. You went ahead and you engaged with the community. You did your due diligence. You got a recommendation. You've done judging at like events before, and you're continuing down this path. And what we want to do is we want to do something special for those judges. And while the monetary value of judge rewards is something that we take into consideration when we actually make them, obviously we don't want them to be entirely worthless and we don't want them to be extraordinarily expensive. But I think that's important to recognize that it is different and separate from compensation, because we don't want judges to feel like they're being shortchanged when they turn up to a local armory, or not a local armory, a road to nationals or a ProQuest, where the TO says, well, you're getting this judge pack, which I think is worth $1,000. So you get that for the weekend and nothing else. Like, that is just not fair for the judges at all. That's not fair for anyone. And it doesn't create a great system, because if we end up missing on the judge packs, then what's going to happen to those judges? All of a sudden, the TO's not going to pay, compensate them for their time. The judge pack is worthless and the judge doesn't want to do their event. So I think that it's very important to recognize that this is entirely separate to the compensation discussed between the judge and the TO. And we leave those up to the TOs as well, in a lot of cases. Road to Nationals and ProQuest, there's a private discussion between a TO and the judges, and they agree on what is fair compensation for their time and effort. And some TOs offer up a box or two of product because that's what they can afford, or that's what they think is reasonable, and judge agrees. It's absolutely fine. Judge reward goes on top of that to recognize the judge's dedication towards flesh and blood judging.
So is there, you said Judge Pack 1, there's a 6 spot of cards in there, like you mentioned. Is Judge Pack 2 already settled and sorted, and the cards chosen?
Yep, we have Judge Pack 2 is on its way. We have printed and we have them ready to distribute. We are waiting for the time where we are going to from Judge Pack 1 onto Judge Pack 2, and then people will be surprised all over again about what will be in Judge Pack 2. And I could say that it's pretty spicy, Judge Pack 2.
Oh, stop it. This is one where I'm not a big collector. If I'm a collector of anything, it's typically sealed product. I like to just say like, oh, I have a pack of this or a pack of that. A sealed judge pack for my collection would be exquisite. So I have gone ahead and done the level 0 test. I am a level 0 judge. Just letting you know that. So congratulations to me. You're welcome, world.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well done.
Look, I do my homework when I have guests on. Okay, I'm a responsible journalist, is what I tell my parents. Okay, that's precisely it. So, no, my parents still think they say I'm on the internet radio, is what they tell people, because they still have no clue what I do for a living.
I mean, that's essentially what this is, right? Internet radio.
That's kind of. I mean, like I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that it's anything more glamorous than that. But yeah, but I did do my level 0. So I want people who are out there to know that the level 0 test is very forgiving. But it is also informative, and you can't just walk in and just sort of roll the dice and say, "Hey, I'm a level 0 judge." That said, can you walk people through the process of going from random scrub who picked up the game, a couple months ago, who wants to go down the judging process, to somebody who is actively, lurking the aisles with their eagle eyes at a major tournament?
All right. So first, you pick up the game, you play it with some friends, and then you cast the game, and then you create Instant Speed Podcast, and then you take the level 0.
Don't do it, friends. Don't do it. That has not resulted in much success. I promise you. Stay in school, kids.
Well, you're a level 0 now, so it can't be all that bad.
Yeah, big fat 0 I am, absolutely.
But no, in all seriousness, it's like the level 0 is meant to be that sort of like that first step, right? You're meant to be somewhat familiar with the game, somewhat familiar with the tournament proceedings. It's very, very forgiving, and I recommend that everybody give it a go. Maybe you might learn a thing or two that you didn't know before, but it's your first step towards becoming a judge. And then going up to that level, you just go and create an account. You go ahead and take the exam. You can take it a couple of times if you want. As I said, very forgiving. When you hit level 1 is when it gets a little bit trickier. We are working towards sort of like study material and basically helping level off that sort of curve at the moment. But essentially, the comprehensive rules, the tournament rules and policy, and the penalties and procedure guideline are your 3 best friends. They contain all of the information you need to be able to complete a level 1 test. And the level 1 tests are split up into rules and policy. You can take each independently. And it's an open book as well. So you've got 24 hours to do it. You can look at the resources as you would be able to on the floor when you're actually judging an event. And once you've passed the test, then you're on to your next step. But it's a slow, methodical process for some. If you're not that familiar with the game, a lot of the time you may be spending on the Facebook channel asking rules questions. You might be in the judge Discord asking rules questions. And that's just how you get started. You talk to people. You get interested in how specific interactions work and the nitty gritty parts of the CR. You find some of the most common rules and look at why they are the way they are, like things like ordering of triggered effects or the differentiation between resolution abilities, activated abilities, static abilities, those sorts of things. And each of those steps just helps you on your way towards creating basically embalming in that education and eventually submersing yourself into the judge program as a whole. And once you become a level 1 judge, then next step is level 2. And that is, again, another 2 tests, getting some experience under your belt, judging 2 tier 2 events or above, and then getting a recommendation from an existing L2 plus. So making sure you have a little bit of that mentor there too.
I have a rules-related question for you, because this has been bothering me for 4 or 5 days already. I'm not going to. I am not going to name names. I am not going to mention any specifics. I was adjacent to a game where I heard a judge was called, and it went up to an appeal based off of something that occurred, and I I just want, and I'm hoping that the person who made the appeal or who was sort of who called the judge is listening, because they wanted a further appeal, but they understood that they had reached the top. So here's what happened. Okay, there was a play made. It was like it was a ninja player pitched for an Art of War, pitched a card that did not have a 0 cost. The Art of War resolved. There was one floating resource. They presented a Kodachi. The defending player said no blocks, and then the other player realized that the Kodachi did not have go again and wanted to take it back. Ultimately, again, I'm playing another game. Like it's round 2 of the calling, and I'm just like, I'm like trying to focus because I was into a really nitty gritty part of the game too, and I'm just trying to focus, but I could not let this that was happening right next to me go by because I wanted to know how this went. Because in my head, it was no, the attack was presented, it did not have go again, but ultimately it got reversed. It was the player was allowed to take the Kodachi back after an appeal. Originally, it wasn't as such. I just want to know what your final godlike ruling is. And again, no names, no nothing. I just want to know because I ended up playing next to the player on the receiving end of the Kodachi. And I said, I think that ruling was incorrect, but what do I know? And he's like, I thought it was, he ended up winning the game anyways, but he's like, I thought it was incorrect also, but he's like, I respect, I appealed, or there was an appeal, it went all the way to the top, and that was the ruling, and I respect the ruling. And I was like, hey, that was the right.
And now it's a mega appeal. It's an appeal of the appeal.
It is an appeal to the highest power because I thought this is a justification for me. They're not listening to this, absolutely not. But for me, because I had asked this to a bunch of people afterwards, to to pros that were there. I had dinner with a few of them and whatever, and I'm like, what's the play here? And they're like, nah, I'm pretty sure that Kodachi's locked in and that turn is gone, right?
Yeah, it's okay. So I'll preface this with this happens a lot. Like, a judge will make a ruling, players aren't happy, they'll go talk to other judges, they'll go talk to me, and they'll ask, was this the correct decision? And I will say that I don't have an opinion on whether or not it was correct because I don't have the context. I wasn't there.
Sure.
I wasn't the head judge. And what we do is we trust our head judges and we trust our appeals judges. We trust our judges to be able to make the correct decision. And there's only a few cases, really serious situations, where we actually say that wasn't correct. And typically there have been cases like where a player was unfairly DQ'd, or maybe they should have been DQ'd. Like that's really, really serious stuff. In this case, I will say that I trust whoever was judging. If they're a qualified judge at an official LSS event, then I trust their judgment, and I will not say whether or not they were correct in that particular instance.
So let me ask you
However,
this. Okay.
I can point you to the section in the tournament rules and policy that guides our distinction on being able to do takebacks. And if you give me a moment, I will look it up on my second screen and I can point you to it.
That was sort of the broader stroke that I was going to ask you, is when does a declared action become sort of cemented in? And when I'm in a very tight spot, and I did this multiple times this weekend, where if I was, in a very high stakes game, I was in the PTI event finals, and I was sweating it so hard, so that whenever I was declaring, I was putting my blocks down, I was being attacked relentlessly by Chain, I got absolutely bodied by Ashley Briggs, who won that PTI event, deservingly so. She piloted amazingly. But whenever I would put a card down for a block, I would actively declare, I'd have the cards upside down or whatever. I'd say, this is not my committed block. I am merely, and just to say it, and because I don't know, and not that anybody was looking to shark or angle shoot here. It was just merely, it was good practice for me. So I guess the question here is, at what point is an action essentially irreversible? Is it when it's declared, or is it when the opponent declares their response to it?
So it's a really tough situation, and this is why we have judges in the first place. It's semantic and completely based on context and everything.
My whole life is semantics. Do you know what I do for a living?
if you're interested in reading it, then it's covered by section 5.4, reversing actions in the tournament rules and policy. And I can, if you want, in classic rules and policy style, read it to you in a long and boring voice, as I did with the chapter 1 of the comprehensive rules back in April.
Long time ago.
5.4, reversing actions. Players are expected to consider their options, then take actions intentionally and commit to them. In general, players are not permitted to reverse a complete action that has been communicated either verbally or non-verbally, aka take backsies. Players may not coerce. Yes, it does. It says aka takes these backsies.
Sorry, that made me laugh.
Players may not coerce their opponent into allowing them to reverse an action they have completed. Dexterity errors are not considered actions taken by a player. And then it goes on to say, if a player realizes they have made the wrong decision for an action they have just taken and wants to make a different decision, a judge may allow that player to change their action as long as they have not gained information since. If the judge cannot be sure that information was not gained, they should not allow the action to be reversed. So there might be a case where the judge thinks that, okay, they haven't gained an action, they've clearly made a mistake that they want to reverse and they want to make a different action. They may have allowed it based on that context. And that's why it's so important to trust your judges at that particular event based on their judgment of the situation, because they were the ones that were there.
Sure.
You know, but like, again, you know, if you, in general, at, say, at a competitive professional event, if you complete an action, you communicate it, that's the point where you can't take it back unless your opponent allows it, or of course a judge comes and says, yes, I'll allow you to take that back because I'm sure that you haven't gained the information, you're not gaining an information advantage, as we would call it, so we're going to allow you to, you know, play the game as best you can.
Yeah, and that's fair as well. I mean, like, I was so razor focused on my match that ultimately it could have been a matter of it was pushed forward and then immediately taken back before the, like, I just, you know, I'm just going by you know, the sort of peripheral thing. Yeah. It was just bothering me.
It's a good question, though, because I think a lot of players are a little bit unsure about like where the boundaries are when it comes to these sorts of semantic issues. We're not robots. We're not playing an online game, as you said earlier. Like, we need to have some sort of like social contract when it comes to being able to play a lot of these cards, being able to take shortcuts, out of order actions, reversing actions, everything like that. The tournament rules and policy provides, you know, some guidelines, but ultimately it comes down to the players that are involved at the event. And of course, if the judge is involved, then that judge as well.
I got some questions from the field. Ooh. If you're ready to rock and roll.
Yep, let's go.
All right.
Let's do this.
Here you go. So we're going to start this off with raised hand judge. And here it comes. And it's from Aaron L. Randall, and we're going straight to the top of the chain here, friends. It doesn't get any more godly than Josh Scott. So the question here is Valiant Thrust, which I got to play a lot of this past weekend in Monarch Draft. If you charge on your opponent's turn thanks to the new armor, will it pop Phantasm?
So the answer is no. And the reason it's no is because abilities that are on cards are typically not functional when they're defending. So if you've got a card in hand, you put it down as a defending card on the chain link. Unless it's one of the very few exceptions that we make, and we specify these in the comprehensive rules, you can just treat the text boxes blank, essentially. The exceptions are things that define properties. So if you look at things like Mutated Mass or Diabolic Offering, those are cards whose text is always functional and always will affect the properties of your cards. Otherwise, typically we have cards that specifically mention when this defends, while defending, activate this only while this is defending. Things that explicitly call out the card is defending abilities that are functional on that. So that would be things like Rally the Rear Guard, Yinty Yanty. Struggling to think of other cards. And then, of course, there are permanents as well. So if you have a permanent, like, a bit of armor, then if you defend with that armor or that equipment, that or all of the text is functional on that because it's a permanent in the arena, despite it being a defending card. So unfortunately, no, you can't charge to give Valiant Thrust additional power to pop Phantasm. That would be pretty dope, though. So maybe next time.
I was gonna say
maybe another card.
Maybe this makes it into another rules and policy adjustment. But the card that I was thinking about was Flex from Uprising, but that specifically on the card says that during the attack or defend, like if you attack or defend with the card, you may pay to modify it. Whereas I guess, like you said, Valiant Thrust is just a modified like text box, but only, I guess, is in play when it's attacked.
Basically only when it's attacking is that sort of going to be viable. If in some far future it somehow becomes a permanent in the arena, oh god, I don't know how I'd fix that in the rules, but then sure, its ability would be functional as a permanent in the arena, but we're getting ahead of ourselves because I have no idea how that's going to work yet.
Yet. There you go.
There's always the hypothetical, ideal and hypothetical. So that's always a possibility that I have to consider.
My whole life is a hypothetical. I'm just waiting to wake up where it's just like, no, this was a coma the whole time. Erica Forsloff asks, do you know of any cool card interactions that not many people know about? And the first time somebody gets introduced to getting greased by like a sharp little creepers play to extend a combat chain, like the most sinister thing is when you ask, let's say, a Runeblade player running creepers who has 2 cards in hand and end the turn on an action with no go again. If you ask them, you're like, does this have go again? And they look at you and they say, no. And then you're like, oh, you son of a bitch. Like, I know your game. Are there any fascinating little interactions that you kind of have in your back pocket of, if this does arise, I know the answer, but nobody has approached me about this yet?
I don't know. I'm pretty loudmouth when I find an interaction, which is cool, to be honest. So I don't really have any in like my back pocket that like no one knows about. There are always some lurking about. Like, I'm trying to think. Like the example earlier that came from Discord, Frost Hex, Crown of Reflection, and was it not Miraging Metamorph, but like Phantasmal Symbiosis. That was a really cool one. There's always some cool ones surrounding things like Amnesia and Erase Face. They come pretty simple once you understand how the card actually functions, but things like, what is it? Amnesia is card text, not card text, it's card name. So you think of something like you've attacked somebody and you've removed the name of all cards that they own. And then you attack them with something like Righteous Cleansing. And Righteous Cleansing has a crush effect, which is like look at the top 5 cards of their deck, banish cards with the same, banish however many cards with the same name from among them. And the kicker is that you can only banish 1 card, even if all of them are exactly the same card, because none of them have names. Therefore, none of them have the same names. Therefore, you can only banish 1 card, essentially.
You're the worst.
And like it's just random stuff like that sort of crops up. But there's so few and far between that I never really sort of lock them in as sort of like my go-to answer for questions like this, because the question comes up a lot. It's like, oh, is there a cool rules interaction that nobody knows about? So, everybody knows a couple of these rules interactions here or there, but the cool ones keep coming up every now and then.
But I mean, if you're sending an Amnesia into a Righteous Cleansing, I'm pretty sure you're probably already winning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're doing pretty good there.
I'm trying to think. There's another one as well. It's like Amnesia and like the Frost Hex Frostbite interaction, where it's like if you amnesia someone and then you give them frostbites, and they have a Frost Hex. I think it's cards and tokens you own, right? Let me just quickly look at Amnesia. This is the thing. This is my trick. I don't know all of the cards off by heart, so
It's nobody's perfect. You said it yourself. You're not robots.
I know. Yeah, so cards and tokens they own lose and can't gain names at the start of their turn. So let's say you're up against Icelander. You amnesia the Icelander. The Icelander in response gives you a Frost Hex and a whole bunch of Frostbites. While you control the Frostbites, the Icelander actually owns them because they're the ones that created them. So the Frostbites don't have a name. And Frost Hex gives all the Frostbites you control the ability to deal arcane damage to you. So if you amnesia an Icelander and they respond by giving you a whole bunch of Frost Hexes and Frostbites, you literally don't take damage because none of your Frostbites have names. Therefore, they don't have the ability. Therefore, they don't do damage to you at the end of your turn.
Okay, well that's good to know.
It's such a niche interaction that it just won't come up in competitive play and will only come up in sort of theoretical scenarios that you'll probably see on the Judge Level 2 exam.
I like it. All right. Last question here is from Tyler Luce saying, you mentioned in Discord that Leviah Redeemed was the most rules-intensive card in this set. What was the process of working with the devs, designers on making sure everything worked? And, I mean, there's so much weird Leviah stuff that happened with Dusk Till Dawn and new cards and flipping stuff over and eating this and being that and whatnot. What is the process of working with, James and Brian and such on making sure that Leviah Redeemed worked?
Yeah, so Brian has talked a little bit about the process, and we keep it pretty close to our chest about exactly how the process works in the testing. Essentially, the cliff notes are James and Brian come up with an idea for the set. They work out the bare bones of the set, what the set's going to be about, where it's going to be, or who's going to be in it, and what cards are going to be in it. Then it gets passed over to the dev team. The dev team do their thing, and then it gets passed to me to do proofing. And I'm involved in all three of those steps in some capacity. James will often message me 2 a.m. in the morning with a rules question about whether or not a specific hypothetical card will work or how it will work. And I'll usually provide comprehensive rules, references about how it will work and why it will work this particular way. And if there's a change needed, we'll talk about the specifics of can this work? What needs to change to be able to make this work? And then through the development process, it's much the same. I talk with the devs regularly. If they have questions, I answer them. And then when we get to the proofing process, I'll work with the devs very closely about specifically how they played the card, what interactions they were looking for, or how they wanted to play in specific scenarios. And then I will basically look at the proofing for particular cards on that. So when it came to Leviah Redeemed, I was, well aware from the get-go about what sort of was the capacity of where James wanted to go with this sort of idea. So I had a lot of time to be able to prepare the comprehensive rules and sort of what the back end needed for being able to make this thing work. And that sort of came down to you'll see the change to the blitz rules, for example, that we don't just specifically say weapons and equipment anymore. It's 11 arena cards, which covers equipment, weapons, and this new Leviah Leviah card. Sorry, I should get the pronunciation right. Otherwise, Mansant will be angry at me.
Yeah, that's a big debate. We just say whatever James says. That's probably gospel.
I'm pretty sure James flicks between them, but I'm a big fan of it coming from Leviathan as opposed to just being at Leviah. Leviah.
Look at that thing. That's a Leviathan. It's no, it's not.
Leviathan. But yeah, that's basically the process, right? I usually get a heads up about certain large changes or large ideas, and I've got a lot of time to think about how the rules change or what sort of syntax will be needed to make certain things work. With Levy in particular, there are lots of like caveats, and like you look at the release notes. The release notes are like 20 bullet points long, and that just sort of goes to show how many different situations needed to be accounted for in proofing this particular card. But the rest is history, basically.
All right. Well, we're going to go to another segment here, which I think this is going to be fun enough to just slam behind the Patreon exclusive. Sorry, everybody else, but if you want to hear me take the judge quiz by the Judge Master himself, you guys can go ahead and check out the Patreon at patreon.com/instantspeed. So. One more question I have regarding just judging and certification and such is that what is an example of one of those high-level, very complex, web of a question that you would get for like the highest level of judge certification?
That's a really good question. We certainly don't want to just put like the most complicated or ridiculous questions out there. Like we can absolutely make a situation with 20 cards, and then you have to like untangle a web or a mess of things. Typically with like judge questions, we focus on a specific interaction between like, especially for level 2 judging, maybe like between 4 or 5 cards maximum. That would probably be my limit. The one question that comes to mind is like things like exposed to the elements versus something like Scalata was like one question that we sort of like looked at for a while, where specific wording on exposed to the elements about what it is targeting. So the difference between choosing when you play the card and choosing upon resolution of the card, and what happens when the targets disappear essentially before it resolves. And those sorts of questions are like important, especially at high level events, which is why we want our judges to sort of be aware of what sort of rules surround them, even though they're not like very common. Because the most important thing, obviously, is we want judges to know where to look for specific interactions. So if something says is to do with targeting or on resolution, they know sort of where roughly in the CR they need to look for a specific example on the floor. But the most complex judge question is sort of depending on how much you know about certain aspects of the rules. But that one comes to mind is the Scalata versus exposed to the elements. We made it quite early on, and it got immediately dumped into the L2 pool instead of the L1 pool because of its complexity.
It's banned anyways, so we're not even gonna touch it.
Yeah, it's banned anyways. Replaced with some other instant that we substitute in there, but who cares about that?
Yeah, no, we don't care. I appreciate you taking the time for this episode. I have one more it's more of a request, actually. Our good friends at the Realm Games, who put on exquisite tournaments and are such community champions, have a request for you, which is essentially, can you give your opening tournament speech that you've given at PTs, at Worlds, etc.? Can you do it in an American accent? And I travel to the US probably about 20 to 25 times a year, and I get it all the time that apparently I speak like a Martian. My accent is unintelligible, and I am made a mockery of. So you, who clearly has a speech deficiency with how you speak.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the honesty.
I'm trying. Listen, if I have been thrown under the bus, I am using you as a cushion. Okay, that's how it's happening. So they want you to give that speech with an American accent.
Oh God. I haven't even practiced an American accent. I don't know how this is going to sound.
It's all good. Just throw in, like, say some stuff and then throw in, like, Toby Keith, and then you're fine.
Toby Keith. Hannah Banana.
Can you do it? Can you give us that speech?
Yeah, okay. I'll try to make one up on the spot.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. Toby Keith, Hannah Banana. Hi, everybody. My name is Joshua Scott, and today we're going to be looking at the world schedule. We have 6 rounds of Classic Constructed and 3 rounds of Blitz. I hope we're all prepared with the correct deck lists all handed in before the event begins. I just want to say a few things before we get started. Each of the CC rounds will be 50 minutes, and then the Blitz rounds will be 35 minutes. We want to be very cognizant of slow play. If you are aware that you're playing slowly or your opponent is playing slowly, make sure to remind them to play a little bit faster so that we can get the round done before the end of time. And otherwise, feel free to put up a hand for a judge. We will not be awarding extra time for anybody who has been playing slowly for the rest of the game. That being said, I hope you're all having a fantastic day. It's a great day to be playing Worlds here in
Barcelona.
Barcelona. And let's play fair, let's play hard, and let's play some flesh and blood.
That was certainly something, I gotta say, because I actually was prepared to like buy a vacuum cleaner from you, like you were at my front door. You know, like you're just a door-to-door salesman. That was exquisite, Josh Scott. Well done.
Do you think I could? I'm American passing.
The question is more so, do you want to be? I think it basically reverts to that. I one of the favorite things that you do is that voice, is that awesome. The voice of the dude who proposed to his girlfriend at McDonald's. So I have 2 requests, because I don't think that you've ever done this on this program, and I think that it is worth doing for the joy of many, which is, can you tell the story in that voice of the person who proposed to his girlfriend? And then after that, I want you to then conclude the rules, or no, I'll tell you the other part after that. But okay, please tell the story. Right.
Okay. So just a little context here. So back when I was a poor student, I used to do bus traveling a lot. I used to go up and see my then girlfriend's family, and this was like a 5-6 hour bus ride. And the buses were packed this one day, and I sat down next to this guy, and it's this big, moldy Pacific guy. And we got to talking, and he was just the most lovely person to talk to. I was expecting just like, a 6-hour drag of a bus ride, as it usually is, but he was the most pleasant, down-to-earth guy. We had an amazing conversation, and I'd said to him, like, I'm actually thinking about proposing to my girlfriend. But I'm a little bit nervous about like how it's going to go. Like, I haven't sort of planned everything out yet. I've got some ideas, but like, I'm just sort of a little bit unsure. He's, starts telling me the story about he proposed to his wife. And I'm paraphrasing his story a little bit, but I'll try to do it justice. And in typical New Zealand Māori Pacific stereotypical accent, I'll try to do it justice. So, I decided I'd propose to my wife. It's about time. She was working at McDonald's, and I had my daughter. So, drove up to the McDonald's. I went inside and got in line, and she was serving at the counter. And I went up to her, and she said, "What do you want?" And I looked at her, and I said, "Oh, can I have a Big Mac? And will you marry me?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, will you marry me?" And she said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Nah, get out of here." And so I went back to my car, and my daughter asked what I was doing, and I told her, and she said, "Dad, you egg." And so when I went back later that day, she came home from work, and she said, "Were you serious back there?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then she was like, "Well, then do it properly next time." And that cleared all doubts that I had about going into proposing to my now wife. And it is a story that I will carry with me to this day.
So this person just inspired you to say, basically, I can do this, and it doesn't have to be over the top, because this guy literally shoved in a proposal between your order and whether or not you want an apple pie with that. Like he just wedged it in there.
He just went for it, and like I said, he was just the most like down to earth, like, no cares in the world guy. Like, and yeah, he said, like, if she's the one, she's the one. You just go for it, and can't be any worse than my proposal. And
Wow. Well, bless you, sir. I have actually I have briefly spoken to your wife via video call in a which was great because I wasn't expecting it. You're like, yeah, I'm here with Flake, and then just turn the phone around. I'm like, hey, hello, hey, what's going on? That was awesome. But my man, thank you very, very much as always for doing the show, for being a pleasant person, and I don't know when I'll see you next. Maybe it's Worlds. We'll see. Ultimately, though, no matter what happens, we always have Flake Josh time. Like that is solidified.
Absolutely.
It's necessary.
There'll be a date night, Josh and Flake.
It's the best. Friends, I say this all the time, and I mean it. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. My favorite thing, and like, it's always a busy weekend, and I get it. And there's so many people that I want to see. The only person that has like essentially chief priority over any of my time is if Josh is like this, like I can only do dinner at whatever time. I don't care what's going on. I will leave the booth if I need to hang out with Josh because he's.
That's why I appreciate you, man. I know it is a busy weekend, and everyone, fantastic. But I always look forward to our mandates as well, man.
Yeah, they're the best. All right, Josh. Well, for those who want to, I suppose, get in touch with you or get in touch with the judging program, what's the best way that they can sort of get more involved in that?
Well, like I said, if you guys want to be a judge, judge.fabtcg.com is the best place to get started. And we have an amazing community on our Discord, and you can start getting involved on the Facebook page and also with your local judge community as well. You can reach out to your judge community representatives in your area to sort of get a little bit connected, get some guidance. I'm a little bit harder to reach, especially these days. But things sort of filter up to me. I usually lurk on Discord a lot, both on the main Discord and the judge Discord. But if you're at an event, you see me, and I'm not busy with an appeals or an investigation, then I'm happy to chat and talk and catch up. So yeah.
And friends, I highly recommend it because, and I'm not trying to put pressure on you, Josh, but one of the best people, like. That time, I think it was in, I don't remember what city we're in. The last time that we all had dinner together, which was like at the hotel.
We're talking about Baltimore, right?
Baltimore. It was Baltimore. We were planning dinner, and I was telling him, I'm like, well, if Josh is like free, I'm having dinner with Josh. And I was like, I invited you over, and they were like, oh, it's like, well, we can we can go somewhere else. I'm like, no. I'm like, you all want to have dinner with Josh, and afterwards. And it's not like you were there holding court or whatever, but everybody has basically come to the same light that I have, which was Josh time is like a required reading. It's like appointment viewing because afterwards everybody said they're like, that was the most like. That was such an entertaining dinner, and it wasn't because you were. It was just everybody was just having a good time telling stories, and like it was so entertaining.
Well, everybody was lovely at that dinner. It was a fantastic group of, and conversation and catching up is not a as you say, right, a grandstanding in front of people. It's about that personal connection and being on the same wavelength, and we just are, and your friends are, and everyone like that. So it's a fantastic time in Barcelona, but not Barcelona. It will be a fantastic time
Baltimore,
in Barcelona.
Yeah. I mean, they're practically the same. Yeah.
Yeah. They're both B places.
I mean, they say that in the States. They say Baltimore, the Barcelona of America. I believe that's on their license plate in Maryland.
I love that.
All right, friend. Well, thank you very much again for doing the show. Keep doing what you're doing, and I guess I'll see you in Barcelona.
Sounds good.
Beauty. All right, friends, thank you so much for listening to the Instant Speed Podcast. To all of our Patreon supporters, you guys rock. You guys can check out exclusive content, get the podcast early by going to patreon.com/instantspeed. For as little as $2 a month, you can support the channel. As well as you could go check out berrygoodembroidery.com/ISP if you want some ISP merchandise, if you want to rep the channel. You can go check that out as well. And to our wonderful friends at Kayfabe Cards, be who you want to be at Kayfabe Cards. Go to kayfabecards.com. That's it for ISP. For Josh Scott, for me, don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning. We'll see you next week on the show.
Well, I work